Anyway, again, welcome to the Jean Cocteau and welcome to LeeChild
Thank
to the
you.
Jean Cocteau. We are very honored to have Lee here in the Land of Enchantment. I think it's his first visit to
It sure
scenic
is.
Santa
Yes,
Fe.
it is.
I met Lee just recently in New York City at the Thriller Fest, where I was given the Thriller Award, Thriller Master, and he was the previous year's Thriller Master, so he presented it to me. I knew before I met him that he was the author of the Jack Reacher books, but I never actually read any of them. So, leading up to that, before I went in there, I said, "Well, I ought to read one of these books, so I know this guy who's going to give me this award here." So I read one of the Jack Reacher books, and then I read another one, and then I read another one, and then I read another one. This guy is a crack dealer. These books are absolutely addictive. When you pick them up, you can't put them down. You stay up all night reading the books, and then you want to read another one. And I'm not sure I'm reading them in the right order. I was reading them in completely random order, but it also seems to me that you're writing them in completely random order.
Yeah. Everything I do is completely random. And I did that deliberately, well, partly for two reasons. Number one, I cannot stand mystery series in particular where the characters talk to each other about past cases. You know, where they sort of say to each other, "Do you remember the affair at the Jean Cocteau Theater in New Mexico?" And, you know, they have this conversation about something that's obviously significant to them, but means nothing to you because you didn't read that book. Partly it's characterization of Reacher. He's not interested in what happened yesterday. He's not particularly interested in what happens tomorrow. It's all about today for him. So he would never refer back. Therefore, you can pick up the series any place. Any book is self-explanatory. You can start anywhere. You can read them in any order. And I felt that was, I mean, that's commercially advantageous in a sense, but also it's reader-friendly because if somebody tells me about a series that is great, but you have to start with book one, then maybe the bookstore doesn't have book one. And you got to start searching for it, and about 45 minutes later, you've forgotten all about it, and you really don't make the effort. It's much better if you can just start with any one of them, which you can, which is challenging for the author in the sense that you've got to introduce the character each time, sufficient for a brand new reader, but not to bore the readers that have read 22 already. You know, that's a challenge author-wise.
How many? This is the new one.
That's number 23.
23. Okay.
Yeah.
That's quite a few. Did you plan on that many when you started? Or were you just hoping that I'm going to write one and see if anyone likes it?
Yeah, you know, plan is a big word, isn't it? And as you know, it's, as everybody who's in any way connected with entertainment, you can't make a plan. You know, if in the middle 1990s I'd have said, yeah, I'm planning a 23-book series, they would have sent the guys with the straitjacket because, you know, you just can't do that. Everything is an accident. The first deal was a 2-book deal because what publishers do, they take a chance on the first book, they promote it as best they can, but they do not want another publisher to reap the benefit for the second book, so they usually buy 2. And I remember at the time thinking, great, that's 2 years before I got to get another job. And now, after 23 books, I'm just beginning to think maybe I'll never have to get another job.
I would hope not. But you know, I started writing when I was like a kid in grade school, little stories for the neighborhood kids and all that. But you actually had another job. You had a whole nother career before you started writing books. You were a television producer and executive and
Yeah, people say, you know, one of the standard questions you get asked is, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? And lots of people like George. I mean, my friend Harlan Coben, for instance, has a line about this. There are some writers who have composition books full of 4-page novels from when they were 7. And then the next author says, Oh, I knew when I was 5, and then some authors knew when they were still fetuses that they wanted to be writers. And I never wanted to be a writer. I never did. What I wanted to be was broadly speaking, an entertainer. I wanted to do something that made you happy for an hour or a day or 2 days, just to make you feel good. And I'm completely transparent about it. I understand myself very well. I am trying to get from you the love and approval I did not get as a child. And I have met numerous, a lot
Come
of
on up.
writers.
We have plenty of seats in front, folks.
Lots of writers are like that. Lots of stand-up comedians are like that. Lots of actors are like that. They lacked something in childhood, and they're trying to make up for it now. And I'm completely open about it. That's what I'm doing. My mother and father hated me, so I hope you like me.
I think you want their money too.
Well, I mean, that was, at the beginning, that was what it was. I was broke. I had a career, as you said, I had a career in television. That I worked for a company called Granada Television in Manchester, England. And it was a fabulous, fabulous place. We made great shows. It was well remembered for its drama, but it also had some great documentary and news strands. But principally, it was a drama producer. We made Jewel in the Crown, Brideshead Revisited, Prime Suspect, Cracker. We made fabulous, fabulous stuff. It was a great company. It was a fabulous place to work. And no doubt I would still be there, except one day my boss said something to me that made it just impossible for me to continue. He said, "You're fired." And not for any misdemeanor or felony on my part, I assure you, it was not just me, it was 300 people. It was that thing that happened in the mid-90s, happened to millions of people, still happening to millions of people, sadly. They find I was 39 years old, and therefore an expensive veteran I had benefits, a pension, I had a great salary, and they made that discovery, hey, we can find some kid who'll do this for a tenth of the price. Or we could maybe program a computer or something. And so we were all out of work. And so the question was, the fundamental thing you got to understand about me is I come from Europe. Therefore, I have no work ethic. Therefore, my first decision was, can I retire at 39? And I thought, sadly, I fell several $1 million short of that. So I thought, all right, I better get another job. And another characteristic of me is that if I really enjoy something, then I want to be doing it. And that is impossible in almost all situations. I will probably, sadly, never play center field for the Yankees. All of these things that I would like to do, I can't, but I had all my life been a huge reader. I just read constantly. It was the only thing in our lives when we were kids. I don't know about Bayonne, New Jersey, but Birmingham, England, where I lived, there was nothing to do back then other than read. And so I just read constantly. So I figured, but curiously, I had never, ever really wondered where books came from. I just thought they were there in the library. And then I was literally 35 years old before I thought, wait a minute, somebody's actually writing these and publishing these. This is a process. And I thought, well, I could participate in that maybe.
So you were mentioning some of the things for Granada, A Jewel in the Crown, Brideshead Revisited. But what you chose to write when you made the thing were mysteries or thrillers. I'm never quite sure of the distinction between them. But had you always loved that? I mean, did you grow up reading, Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and people like that?
Yeah, I had. I mean, the difference between a mystery and a thriller, so they say, is an extra 0 on the advance for a thriller. So, and I had, broadly speaking, I started, Sherlock Holmes, obviously, and there was a British kids author called Enid Blyton, who I'm never actually certain whether she was a real woman or whether she was some kind of sweatshop with about 130 writers, because the output was phenomenal. I mean, there were like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, and it broke down into certain series. The most famous probably was The Famous Five, which was 4 kids and a dog, and transparent wish fulfillment in as much as the parents were always absent. And so these kids were just having a great time on their own. But then there was another series called The Secret Seven, and that was really a mystery 101. It was full of, clues, deductions, disguises, how to get out of a locked room, all this kind of thing. It was kind of a primer for mysteries, and I did love it. And then I graduated to a Scottish writer called Alistair MacLean, who was a really popular, solid thriller writer at the time. And then I moved on to the Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, John D. MacDonald. And I really, I'm basically a mystery writer. I like the idea that you will have a problem and solve a problem, because I think that is absolutely the consoling thing. It's why people love these books, because real life is terribly unsatisfactory. Real life, nothing ever gets fixed. If your car gets stolen, you'll never see it again. If your house gets broken into, they'll never find the guys. You'll never get your stuff back. That's the reality. And so we live with this constant buzz of frustration. And the idea that in a book, you bet you're going to get your car back. You bet Reacher is going to find those guys and he's going to shoot them in the head. And we love that consolation, that satisfaction.
Now you're a mystery writer, but I know you were, as you say, you were English. Grew up in Birmingham, worked for Granada, all of that. But Reacher is a very American character. You're an American. Even you live here now, but he's a very American. He's not Sherlock Holmesian in the least, and he's certainly not Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot. He's not solving the murder of the vicar in the library. It seems much more in the tradition of Hammett, Chandler, Travis McGee, Spencer. Was that a conscious decision, or do you just liked American mysteries better than British? Or
it was, it is common that people say, this is a really American archetype. And that is actually a little bit cheeky, in my opinion, because what this really is, this is a timeless character, the noble loner, the mysterious stranger, and certainly, that's hugely American. If you go back 150 years to the westerns, they absolutely use that character over and over again. Zane Grey. Do you read Zane Grey?
Sure.
The typical Zane Grey scenario is there's a homestead somewhere on the prairie, completely lonely, and for some reason all the men are absent. They're on a cattle drive somewhere 1,000 miles away, and the women and children are in the homestead, and there's a desperate peril coming, and everything is about to go really, really bad. And then a mysterious rider comes in off the range, and in exchange for a woman-cooked meal, he will unsheath his rifle, he will take care of the problem, and then crucially, he will ride off into the sunset. Because the riding off is the most important part. Because what do you do with the guy if he sticks around? There's all those gratitude issues. In fact, but that character was not invented by the Westerns. That character was inherited from really medieval Europe, where instead of being the prairie out west, it was usually the Black Forest. And instead of being a homestead, it was a band of pilgrims. They were traveling to the Holy Land through the Black Forest, which was this huge, uncharted, dangerous terrain. And there's some kind of terrible problem, and it's all about to go really bad. And at the very last minute, a knight rides out of the trees, takes care of the problem, and rides on. Medieval Europe didn't even invent it. Scandinavian sagas had it first, and then Anglo-Saxon poems had it. You could even go back to religious myths, the arrival of a savior. You can go back to the ancient Greeks, the Odyssey. This is a character that's been around forever. And so, yes, certainly Reacher operates in America. And the reason for that is because that character was driven out of Europe. When Europe became settled, densely populated, relatively safe. I mean, now the Black Forest is a cutesy tourist attraction. You're not going to get in trouble there anymore because, and therefore that character, the frontier character, was shoved out to where there was a frontier, which was the US and actually Australia. And Japan has the same, Japan has this myth, the Ronin, a samurai that has been disowned by his master and sentenced to wander the land doing good. So it's a totally timeless and international character. It pops up in every single culture. And so I figured that's what I want to do because it's been market tested for 3,000 years. It works,
I think within modern mysteries or thrillers, though, Reacher is unique because most of the other big series characters are definitely grounded. I mean, Spencer Spencer is there in Boston with Hawk, and cases are coming to him. Travis McGee is living on a houseboat in the Florida Keys. Other people are, they're gumshoes in Los Angeles. They're waiting for someone to come through the door and say, "Here's the case." Reacher is just wandering around, the United States with no luggage, buying fresh clothes every 3 days, which is just amazing. It still astonishes me every time I come on that. He has nothing but his toothbrush and his passport. If I understand, that's pretty astonishing.
I mean, it was, if you look at what everybody else is doing, it's essentially a soap opera. And I say that with no denigration whatsoever. A soap opera is an incredibly sophisticated way of serial narrative drama. And again, without any denigration, soap opera audiences, because I made my living for nearly 20 years from television audiences, soap opera audiences are extremely sophisticated also. There are multiple story strands running for months, and some of them don't recur for 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time, and yet the audience remembers them, picks up on them, is alert to them. So I've got nothing bad to say about soap operas, and actually a lot of good to say about them, but everybody else was doing it. So I thought, I've got to do something different. Because again, I was broke, I was out of work. It was not a hobby, it was not a sort of kind of thing I would kind of sort of like to do. It had to work. Otherwise, I mean, literally, when I got kicked out of TV, they gave me a certain amount of money as severance, and by the time I'd paid everything off, I had 7 mortgage payments in the bank, and so I had to get this done within 7 months. Otherwise, I'd have been losing my house, and so it had to work. And so I thought, be distinctive, do something different. Don't do the same as everybody else does. And it took away a lot of good stuff. Soap opera is powerful because the responsibility is shared between a larger cast. And for instance, my daughter loves Patricia Cornwell's books. And I said to her, "Really? You like Kay Scarpetta?" And she said, "No, not really. I like Lucy." There's always somebody else that can carry the weight. So I gave all of that up to try and be distinctive. And again, I was really, really aware that from working so long in entertainment that it is not the author who decides whether the character is cool. It's the reader. You're completely helpless. All you can do is just do an honest portrayal the way you think you should. And if it works, it's the audience that decides. It's not the writer. In fact, it's terrible when the writer tries to push it too hard. Hey, yeah, my guy's really cool. That's just awful.
Well, the first book, you had considerable challenges. You were talking about some of them last night at dinner, promoting it, getting it out, the initial print runs.
It was. We had dinner last night. It was real fun because we went over the early days, and to me, it's been 21 years since the first book came out. But to me, obviously, I've lived that day to day, and so, what is that expression about? A frog in the hot water that you never really notice it day by day. But when I look back, yeah, it's insane. The first print run of Killing Floor was 18,000. And these days I get 18,000 shoplifted in Manhattan alone. And the first years were all about, please, I exist, notice me, read these books. And we would do stuff like giveaways. We bought 500 Killing Floor paperbacks and gave them away at Grand Central and Penn Station to people going on the train. We did the same in London. The train that runs from London to the airports, Gatwick and Heathrow, we gave books away.
And then they tried to stop you. What do you think you're doing here? Right?
Yeah, they always do that. What are you doing here, giving stuff away? You probably need a permit or something like that. And it was hard going at first. And I distinctly remember, you go to these all the time, conventions,
right.
Fan and writer conventions. The first one I ever went to, for mystery writers, it's called BoucherCon, named after Anthony Boucher, who was the New York Times book reviewer, probably the first person who took mystery seriously. So they named a convention after him. And I remember going to my first one and sitting around with a bunch of other authors. And obscurity would have been a giant leap forward for any of us. And we sort of looked at it, we were looking at each other, and we decided, if we just keep on working, keep on showing up, so one of us might make it. And that bunch of people, there was Michael Connolly, Harlan Coben, Dennis Lehane, George Pelicanos, Laura Lippman, and me.
It's too bad none of them ever made it.
Yeah. But I really remember just that feeling. Show up, keep showing up, and one of us will make it. And it was a great generation. But I have to say, it was a generation that was really coming in on the very end of the old style of publishing, because all of us were supported for multiple years. It was probably 6 or 7 years before the publisher made any profit on any of us. But they were playing a long game back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now they're not playing a long game anymore. So, people look at my career and think, yeah, it's possible. But, sadly, it's a little less possible now than it was when I started. But having said that, I remember starting in 1997 and speaking to a lot of established authors at that time. And they all said, oh, I'm really glad I started when I started. And then the very old ones would say, no, I'm really glad I started when I started. Like everything else in life, it gets worse every day.
But you started pretty quickly. That first book of yours won a couple of awards, as I recall.
It did. It was a really solid cult hit inside the genre community. And then the second one a little bit more, and the third one a little bit more. And then it would break out it broke out sporadically in different countries. New Zealand, for instance, on the third book. New Zealand is the world capital of Reach of Madness. It just went crazy after 3 books. Bulgaria. I remember thinking, at least I can put that on my tombstone. He was huge in Bulgaria. They have and I was really interested as to why, because it was insane in Bulgaria. It would always come out in October, the book there, and it would go straight to #1, and it would stay at #1 until the next October, when the next book would be #1. And I thought, how is this happening? Because maybe I could bottle it and reproduce it in other countries. So I went there, and the reason was there was a guy who did The Tonight Show in Bulgaria. It was an exact facsimile of the Jay Leno-style Tonight Show, except instead of Jay Leno, it was this guy called Slavy Trivanev. And he was a mad Reacher fan, and for 5 nights a week in peak time, he talked about nothing else.
You can't buy that kind of publicity.
You really can't. God knows we've tried.
And you were telling me last night you were on the Craig Ferguson show.
Yeah, I got on the Craig Ferguson show quite early because he's another British refugee. And in fact, we worked at the same place at the same time. We both worked for Granada. Never knew each other at the time, but we pinned it down. We were there at the same time.
So, Reacher, I read your introduction to the first book, which I guess was for the reprint of the first book, wasn't originally part of it, and there are a number of unusual things about Reacher and some of the decisions you made. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about them. I mean, you talked a little about how he moves around, the knight errant. You know, nobody, instead of a lance and a shield, he has a toothbrush and a passport. Um, he's also got to be one of the most physically formidable characters ever seen in when I'm reading a Reacher book and 8 bikers are coming around him in the parking lot. I'm sorry for the 8 bikers.
Yeah.
They're in trouble whether they know it or not. Did you give that a lot of thought to make him such a physical? I mean, in one of the books I read recently, some of the other characters are calling him the Incredible Hulk and Bigfoot and so forth. He's really tough.
Yeah, I really did take it was a two-part decision. It started with one decision that then led to another decision. The one decision was that as a reader of the genre, I was getting really bored and fed up with the dysfunctional hero, which, started a long time ago. You could say 30, 40 years ago. You might say James Lee Burke, David Robichaux was the first of these wounded heroes, alcoholic or recovering alcoholic. And the problem with that is that...
Matthew Scudder?
Yeah, Scudder, there you go. The problem with that, though, is that the first time around, anything is good. It's fresh, it's new, it's exciting the first time around. But then subsequent writers would imitate it and fall prey to a kind of inflation, so that, after 5 years or 10 years, they were super miserable. They were divorced. They were recovering alcoholics. They were divorced. They all had teenage daughters who hated them. Some of them had, made a mistake. They'd been cops or something, and there'd been a stake out in the dark at night, and they'd shot at a fleeing shadow, and it turned out to be a 12-year-old boy, and they were so traumatized that they had to go and live in a cabin in the woods and talk to nobody, and it just got more and more and more miserable. And I was thinking, fundamentally, surely we don't really want to read about miserable people. So what I wanted to do was skip backward to when the hero was a fairly plain and uncomplicated person with no problems. And then so the second decision was, well, why not take that even further? Because all novels have got to involve conflict at their core. Whatever sort of novel it is, there's always a conflict. If it's a literary novel, it might be a conflict between two philosophical poles or two feelings or something. There's always a conflict. And the greatest conflict paradigm of all time is David versus Goliath. And I really wanted, as a kid, I read that story, and I really liked Goliath. I wanted Goliath to be the good guy. And I just thought, how would it work if we had a non-miserable hero who was actually physically unafraid of anything, so that he didn't have to be worried or miserable? Would it work? And theoretically, it really shouldn't work, because a character needs edge or something to be interesting, and a flawless person should not be interesting. But the thing about Reacher is that he is actually fairly eccentric, and he is fairly odd. But the crucial thing is he doesn't know that. He thinks he's perfectly normal, and so you get his characteristics without the navel-gazing. So he's not tiresome. He just goes about his business. He thinks he's normal. But I did want that feeling, again, for consolation for the reader, because all of us have been in situations where, it's late at night, you're walking down a city street, and you see, somebody coming toward you. You're a little bit nervous, a little bit, is this going to be all right? Suppose you didn't have to feel like that. Suppose that you just knew that it was 1,000,000 to 1 that the next guy to come around the corner would be any trouble to you. I just thought, would that be attractive? Would that be different? and I guess I love it. I mean, I would love to be like that. I mean, in a little bit, you can put it on, you know, because I remember when I went to college, I was at a party, and I left real late, and I was walking home at about 5 in the morning down this bad street in the city where the college was. And in the distance, I saw this really nasty-looking guy walking toward me on the same sidewalk. And we were getting closer and closer to each other all the time. And I was thinking, oh, no. And I thought, I cannot cross the street to the other sidewalk because that is just, you know, that's just a confession. That's just an invitation. I thought, you know, I'm going to have to stay and confront him. And we got closer and closer and closer. And then he crossed the road and used the other sidewalk.
Well, I've wondered about your own background. I mean, the fight scenes, the action scenes in the Reacher books are really first rate, and there's a tremendous amount of seeming expertise. I mean, I'm not expert enough to judge whether you're getting it all right or not, but all the stuff about guns and this kind of gun and that kind of gun and this kind of ammunition and all that. Do you have considerable background in guns and shooting and weaponry and police techniques? And because Reacher certainly does, and the books have a tremendous sense of verisimilitude in that way.
Yeah, they do, and it's all completely made up. I mean, I have I have no expertise at all with guns. You know, I love machines. You know, I love manufacture. I grew up in a manufacturing town where they did, in fact, make guns. BSA, British Small Arms, made guns and eventually motorcycles. But so I love the idea of a precision machine that feels really good in your hand. But I have no real interest in guns. I don't own one. I have never fired one. I've never even held one, apart from when a photographer wants me to pose with one. So the gun thing is a question of interest. I mean, not research in a painstaking way, because, like I said, I like small machines. I understand how they work, and it's very easy to figure it out. People volunteer their assistance, because when you're on tour in the U.S., typically the publisher will arrange for what they call a media escort to meet you in each city, and they take you around all your appointments. They deliver you back at the airport the next morning. You fly on and you meet a new media assistant. And one year there was Walden Books in Little Rock, Arkansas, really wanted me to go. And Little Rock is really not much of a media market, so there was no media escorts there. So instead they hired a retired business guy who volunteered to do it. And he picked me up at Little Rock Airport. And the first thing that I noticed was parking at Little Rock Airport cost 25 cents. You know, it was like $17 at LaGuardia and 25 cents in Little Rock. And then we went for barbecue, which was lovely. And he had gotten the press pack that the publicist sends out, which is the schedule for the day and the press release and a copy of the book. And bless him, he had read the book, and like you, he'd then read another one and so on, until he'd read them all. And then he picked me up, and we did the event, which was an afternoon event on a Sunday. And we finished about 5 o'clock. And he said to me, do you want to have a pizza? And I thought, well, it's 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon in Little Rock, Arkansas. What else am I going to do? So I said, sure, George, let's go and have pizza. So we go back to his house, and we go in his house, and he has all the blinds drawn against the sun. And so my eyes acclimatize to the gloom inside, and I see that on his dining room table is covered with guns. And he says to me, Lee, this is one of every gun the Reacher has ever used in your books. And I thought, who knows I'm here? But it turned out to be really fine. He was a very nice guy. He was relatively sane. And I said to him, George, surely it's nice of you to buy the books, but please don't tell me you went out and bought all the guns as well. He said, no, they're from my collection. And he took me into his garage, which was a triple garage, completely devoid of cars. It was just had rack after rack after rack of guns. He was a big gun collector. He had some of those Al Capone Tommy guns. He had a perfect condition 1873 Colt Peacemaker, alongside a rusted out frame of the same thing that he'd found in a stream bed. And the hammer was rusted in the back position, so that presumably this was a gunfight. Somebody was about to shoot at somebody else, they got shot instead, died in the stream, the gun was left behind. And he said if there's anything that I wanted to know, I should just ask him. And he gave me a kind of free sample. He said, did you know that the two main types of revolver, the two main manufacturers of revolvers in the US, which are Colt and Smith & Wesson, the cylinders go round opposite directions per manufacturer? No, I did not know that. And so I thought, great. So I put it in the next book. And but that doesn't always work, because a little while later I was in London, and I had dinner with a writer called Andy McNabb, who he became famous for a nonfiction memoir about the first Iraq War. He was a member of the SAS, which was the British equivalent of Delta Force. And at the time he left the British Army, he was the most decorated soldier in the British Army. And he told me over dinner, I was interested in a professional's attitude towards guns, because guns are so fetishized generally. Here's a guy who's really walked the walk. And I wanted to ask him how he regarded guns. And he said he didn't care. He didn't care what it was. That he would take any gun out of the store, and he didn't care what it was, except he had one rule only, which was that he would not use an automatic weapon that was already loaded, because he wanted to load it himself with a fresh magazine, because he was worried that if it had been left loaded a long time, the spring temper might have been lost, so that it would not load the second round. And I thought, great, here is the most decorated soldier in the British Army giving me some really good technical information. So I put that in the next book. Reacher would never use a preloaded thing because he's worried about the temper of the spring. And I got immediately 10,000 emails from Texas alone saying, you limey asshole, my granddaddy's had a gun that was loaded since 1947 and it works just fine. So you cannot win. Research, you cannot win.
You mentioned the Army, and that's another thing. Of course, many of the Reacher books are after his military career, where he's traveling around the United States with his toothbrush. But there are a number of them that are also during his career as an MP, rising quite high to major, I believe, in the MP. And once again, there's a real sense of verisimilitude there, that you really know what you're talking about with the MPs and the military. Have you ever been in the service yourself, or?
No, I never was. My dad was in the British Army in World War II, and my grandfather in World War I. But my dad remembers nothing about MPs other than they would jump out of a Jeep outside a bar and hit everybody over the head with a stick. And so I just figured that, the police department anywhere in Santa Fe, presumably the police department regard themselves as tougher and more efficient than the population as a whole, because they got to police you. And so I figured same for the Army, that the military police, especially the CID elite units, are going to be tougher than the general population. And so I sort of took it from there. But actually the major part, his rank, he's a West Point graduate and a major. And I did that because of fealty to the myth of the knight errant. Because to be a knight errant, first of all, you got to be a knight, and therefore you had to have significant rank. And so I felt a commissioned officer, a major, that fit the bill. Whereas the stuff that he talks about having done is actually really not what a major would do. It's much more like what a warrant officer would do. But that is part of what we have to do. You know, you get it slightly wrong in order to get it right in a larger sense.
Do you? I'm often asked about my fantasies if I have charts and notes because it's very complex. There's a lot of characters, a lot of history, etc. And I wonder the same thing about Reacher with 23 books now plus short stories that you've done. Do you have like a big chart of Reacher's entire life, and well, this is what he was doing in November of 1994, and then this is here he was in 1997 and 2012. This happened to him.
No, absolutely not. I have, what I have is, I mean, it just used to be chaotic, and I made a bad mistake one time. If you trace back his alleged promotional path, second lieutenant, captain, major, then it went back to being a captain at some point. And I thought that was just a pure mistake. And so for one of the books called The Enemy, I think, part of the plot becomes that he's demoted, he's dropped a rank. And so people think, wow, I'm really organized. I planned that 8 books in advance. And actually, no, it was just a complete mistake. But since then, there's a retired school teacher who is a big fan, and she maintains a mental database. And if I need to know what he was doing in November 1994, she's called Dot. I just email her and say, Dot, what was Reacher doing in November 1994? And she tells me.
I have those too. I have a couple fans in Sweden, Ilio and Linda, and I have to, they. I particularly make a mistake with people's eye color. I'm constantly eye color is changing, and once a horse changed sex between 2 books, and my fans write me letters about that. But now I write to Ilio and Linda and say, "What this character? I think he was in the 3rd book. What color were his eyes?" And they tell me. It's very useful to have these uber fans.
Yeah.
Well, do you have Reacher's life, plotted out? I mean, or do you just, when it's time to write your 24th book and your 25th book and your 26th, are you just going to make it up, or do you already know what those books are going to be and how his life arc is?
I have no idea what the next sentence is going to be. I mean, I really, there are so many different ways of doing it. There are some writers, for instance, Jeffrey Deaver, anybody read Jeff? Really nice guy, good friend of mine, but he is the exact polar opposite of me because he will do a 300-page outline that then he turns into a 500-page novel. And I couldn't do that because for me, it's the story that I just love the story. It's why it's how I knew I could become a writer, actually, is that all my life, literally all my life, I have always just told myself stories, daydreamed stories, just lived in a fantasy world. You know, I never drive to the store. I'm always piloting a fighter jet through hostile territory. You know, I'm never driving here or there. I'm always going to Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin to pick up some secret agent. You know, I just live in a fantasy world, and I figured all I got to do is write it down. So for me, it's this. I just love the development of the story, and if I knew the story in advance, even if I made 1 page of notes, even if I said this happens, then this happens, but really it was that, then I've told myself the story. I'm done with it. I want the next story. So I just make it up literally. And for instance, this book, the new book, Past Tense, the opening paragraph, I just write an opening paragraph as well as I can. And then I think, all right, now what's the next paragraph? And in the opening paragraph of this one, I mentioned 2 things. Reacher has spent the late summer in Maine. And now, because Reacher has very few rules, but what he likes to do is be warm in winter. So he's going to head south. And then I put, like the birds in the air above him, he's going to begin his migration. And then I just thought, first of all, I mentioned Maine. And then I mentioned these birds. And I thought, all right, what's that telling me? The main thing, I thought, Stephen King lives in Maine. Could I do a Stephen King type of strand in this book? And the other thing was the birds, way back, for no reason at all, I mentioned that Reach's father, in order to balance the fact that he was this stone killer as a Marine infantry officer, he was also a bird watcher, to show the sort of peaceable side of his nature. So I thought, all right, I'm going to do a Stephen King type strand, and I'm going to do something about Reach's father because I mentioned birds. So then it just takes off from there. And I have no clue whatsoever what is going to happen. I do not know what's going on. I don't know how it's going to end up. The story just works itself out. And for me, that's really important, because if I had a plan, I'd be bored of it, and the boredom would show through in the writing. And I also feel that there are so many glorious byways and highways that you can take, just odd little things, changes of direction. I would be intimidated, I would be inhibited from doing that because it would not be in the plan. And so the plan would get in the way for me.
So this is the 23rd. Is the 24th book already written? And
No, it started. It's about 1/3 of the way through. It's called Blue Moon, and I really have no idea what it's about yet because it's not finished.
And you do one of these a year, right?
Yeah, which is, people say that with some kind of wonderment about it. I'm not going to point out that not all writers do a book every year, but
I'm only 7 years late on the new one.
I'm far too polite to point that out, but people think one a year is like a big deal, and it really is not. I came from live television where your deadline is 0, or at best 5 seconds. There's a scene in is it in Broadcast News, that movie, where somebody is literally dictating into the anchor's earpiece, and he is saying the words a second later. Those were my deadlines in the past. So a deadline of a year is an absolute luxury. And it compares very badly to those people we were talking about earlier, those old pulp writers who I'm regarded as this grizzled old veteran because I've done 23 books. People used to do hundreds of novels. And so the modern style, 1 book a year, is really very, very easy. It is better than digging a ditch, believe me.
No, I haven't. Although I've read by this point a considerable number of the Reacher novels, I haven't read all of them yet. But he does seem to travel around Maine and Pennsylvania, the Northeast. There, I've seen that, and you've gotten them out to the Dakotas and all that. But maybe they're just in books I haven't gotten to. But I haven't seen too many like in the Deep South, and I don't think he's been out here to the Land of Enchantment yet.
He has not. He's never been to New Mexico as far. Well, he might have been, because he doesn't tell me everything. But I think he's certainly been to Georgia. He's been most places. Texas. He's been Wyoming in the last one. He goes where I want to send him, obviously, because that's
and
my.
Do you go to all these places before him?
I don't go for the purpose of research because I think that is, 1 book a year is, like I said, not a difficult target, but it would make the research too fresh. And the thing about research is that, especially location research, you've really got to let it percolate for a long time until you understand which are the important parts and which aren't. It's like that iceberg thing. You've got to throw away 90% of it and use the 10% that means something. And that takes a certain amount of time to become clear in your mind. So I will always do it backward. I'll have been somewhere first, and then I'll need to write a book, and I'll think, all right, so what sort of feel do I want for this? And that starts to dictate the location based on what I've seen before. If it needs to be gray and cold, it might be the coast of Maine in the spring. If it needs to be hot and sweaty, it'll be Texas in the summer or something like that. And so it's based on what I already know rather than fresh research, because fresh research just sticks out like a sore thumb. We've all read books, where you can hear the author saying, I've done the research, so I'm going to put it in, damn it, whether I need it or not.
So in other words, we're going to have to wait a few years before we see Jack Reacher eating green chili and visiting Meow Wolf.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it could be a few years.
Would he like green chili?
I'm sure he would. Although he's no real gourmet, what he likes best is a cheeseburger and a peach pie or something like that. Yeah, coffee, of course.
Well,
Yeah.
coffee, yes,
Yeah.
yes. We were trying to determine the proper cocktail here, and
Yeah.
we asked Lee last night, and coffee seemed to be his beverage of choice. Well, why don't we throw it open? Do we have the second microphone here to run it to and fro here, and we'll throw it open to the audience, and let's get the microphone in first so we can hear your question. Oh, do we have it there?
Well, we could ask a question. I'll repeat it until we get the microphone. Oh, here it comes. I think we
Okay.
got it. Have we got it? I don't know.
All right, there's a microphone. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Right back there. Yes. Or go you. Yeah. Fine.
Hi. How do you feel forgetting the box office that's still left with Tom Cruise about casting a diminutive actor to play Jack Reacher?
All right. I have to jump in here. Last night at dinner, I asked the same question in somewhat different words to Lee and said, "I'm not going to bring this up during the interview." And he said, "Don't worry. When you throw it up to the audience, the first question." And you have proven him to be a prophet.
Well, here's the story, and from the beginning. It has a conclusion. So we'll go through the whole story. It was, it's a binary decision. Do you want a movie or not? And I love the movies. And to me, the idea that some little thing I had done will be forever in the world of movies was just lovely. I really wanted that to happen. Like you get one at bat in the major leagues, you're in the baseball encyclopedia forever. I just wanted it to be like that. So I really wanted a movie. So we had a lot of movie deals right from the very beginning. And we ran through all the usual upsets that happen with Hollywood. The very first deal, the company was bought by another company and it became an orphan project. The second deal was with Sony Pictures and the executive died. So it was literally an orphan project. And then it rolled around to 2005, which is now 13 years ago. And we did a deal that involved the usual number of executive producers. When you go to the movies, you see all these names at the beginning. And they're the people that basically finance it and organize it. And Paramount was involved, and Cruise Wagner, which was his production company at the time, was involved as executive producers, nothing more. And then it went into development for 6 whole years, and in 2011, the screenplay was written by Chris McQuarrie, who had won an Oscar for his screenplay for The Usual Suspects. And it was a great screenplay, and it circulated amongst all the interested parties, all the executive producers, and Tom Cruise read it and thought, wow, I want to play this character. I did not know that at the time. I got a call from the executives, and they said they were going to fly to New York to take me to dinner. And the restaurant they mentioned was such an expensive restaurant and so difficult to get into that I knew they were going to tell me it was Tom Cruise. If it had been somebody else, we'd have gone to a cheaper restaurant. So I put on a tie, which I have only one, and I get to the restaurant. There's a little bit of chit chat, and I say, "Come on, guys, just tell me it's Tom Cruise, right?" And they say, "Yes, it is." And I sensed that I had like half a second. If I had thrown myself on the floor screaming and yelling, they would have undoubtedly canceled the project. But then I went down the rabbit hole of thinking about it strictly from my point of view. You see, and here's my point of view. I wrote the book. The book is the ultimate product. There is nothing beyond the book. Nothing can ever change it or modify it or alter it. The book is the definitive thing. And a movie is just a side project, like many other side projects. For instance, there's a long time ago now, after about 12 books, we got a message from Poland. There was a thrash metal band in Poland that wanted to do an album where each of 12 tracks was a Reacher book condensed into a 5-minute thrash metal song in Polish. And would I mind? And I said, no, knock yourself out. And they sent me the lyrics and for approval, which I couldn't read because I can't read Polish. So somewhere out there's a 12-track thrash metal album in Polish, and nobody thinks that has ruined the Reacher books, you know, because that is a peripheral side project. So from my perspective, I felt that the book was invulnerable. Nothing could change the book. Nothing could alter the book. And again, selfishly, from my point of view, how do I promote in Indonesia or China or Brazil, you know? The way to do that is to have a big international star do your movie. So I was relatively happy about it at the time. In fact, I really didn't care. They could have had Katie Holmes play Jack Reacher as far as I was concerned, as long as the brand was... these are people sitting down at a table saying, we would like to spend $120 million promoting your brand. You know, who's going to say no to that? So I did totally underestimate how upset the readers were going to be. And with Tom Cruise was a lovely guy. We got on really well. We had a lot of fun. He works like crazy. He's terrific. No, he never ever mentioned Scientology to me. The whole thing was a delight from my point of view. But I understand the readers were very upset. So there's a clause in the movie contract that says after 2 movies, I have a veto whether there will be any more. And so today is what, Sunday? So a week ago, Wednesday, I did a deal where we are going to take it to television instead. We're going to do long form, you know, season-long binge watching type, probably Netflix or something. And with a new actor. And we're going to, what I would like to do is involve all the readers as an expiation. I would like to involve all the readers to choose, to nominate, to suggest, to decide, but they have to be, and it will be the biggest motherfucker you have ever seen. Which you've got to be careful about who you suggest, because already, you know, people over the years have suggested, oh, Tom Cruise is awful. Should have been Daniel Craig. Well, Daniel Craig is smaller than Tom Cruise. I was once on a plane with Daniel Craig, and I got up to go to the bathroom. I tripped over him. So we need a huge, you know, and I would love it to be an unknown guy. I would love to go back to that model that we had, you know, 50s, 60s, maybe a little bit in the 70s, where you could, like the Sean Connery thing with James Bond, you know, an unknown guy steps into the role. I would love it to be that. And I think television can stand that, you know.
Although it should be pointed out that the first person to play James Bond was Woody Allen. So
well, there you go.
There is that, but Woody Allen wasn't available for Reacher, I guess.
Yeah, there are people that said he would have done just as well.
All right, we have another question over here.
Thank you so much for coming to New Mexico. Can you tell us how you use agents and lawyers to help you protect your work?
I'm pretty careless about that, to be absolutely honest. That, you know, it's a bit of a myth that people get really worried. I've seen lots of starting out writers, you know, they put copyright and all that stuff, and they mail it to the Library of Congress or whatever they do. I have really never, ever heard a serious case where a publisher or an agent has stolen anything. It's a largely overblown fear. And then the rest of it takes care of itself, that if the book is making money for the publisher, then the publisher deals with all of those aspects, which now in the digital age is very, very serious. You know, I bet that we have 200, 300, 400 times a week these torrent sites we have to attack in some way. But fortunately, there's a whole industry that does that for you now. But the paranoia about your idea being stolen, I mean, I can honestly say I have never seen that happen. And so I think there are better focuses for one's lawyers and agents to be working on rather than paranoia about that.
Honestly, I like Lee. I've never seen a real confirmed case of a studio or a network stealing the idea of some writer and making a television show or movie of it. The real danger for writers comes in the other direction. I mean, if you have anything successful, sooner or later there's going to be somebody in Fargo, North Dakota who finds some local ambulance chaser and sues you because you stole it from him. And you say, I've never heard of you or met you. How could I possibly? Well, I had the same idea and I showed it to my Uncle Fred and he said it's just the same.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely, that happens. It's just like it's a routine scam, you know. It's like these Nigerian banking scams where literally every time one of my books comes out, I probably get, I don't know, 20, 25 letters saying, you stole my idea, I'll settle for $10,000.
Yeah, first row here.
Thank you for coming to Santa Fe. I may be your greatest fan, but I don't know. There may be 129 who think the same thing. My first question would have been about TC, so we'll just let that go. I love your books. The very first one I ever read 21 years ago, it is so daunting to me that I have to wait 364 days after that I've read the book when I get it in my hand. I am a Reacher creature. I'm very proud of that. And I want to tell you what I love about him. Not as a woman, but as a vulnerable person in the world today. I think what you have done with the right and the wrong, the good and the bad, that the right and the good always wins. And I love that, particularly today in our world where there is so much corruption. And I love that Reacher has such a sense of dignity and integrity, whether he's in his close of 3 days or has just finished basically beating someone to a pulp. I love that there is so much dignity with that. And I don't like violence, but I root for him when he starts in on someone. So I really, seriously, and I too am like George. What you have done with fight scenes and guns and how you describe that is incredible. A friend of mine has met you several times in Houston, and he says he believes you are a genius, and so I share that with you today.
Well, that's very sweet. Thank you. I don't know why people keep saying thank you for coming to Santa Fe. You make it sound like Ulaanbaatar or something like that, where it's a hard thing. But I'm glad that's really nice to hear, and obviously, and because it is there's a huge leap of faith for a writer, because one thing I learned very early, and it's really well summed up in there's a book by David Mamet, who is a screenwriting guy from Hollywood he's a bit weird now, but he used to be very sound. It's a book called Bambi versus Godzilla. And along the way, he makes a point about, he's really actually talking about actors on the screen. But I think it translates just as well as characters in a book. When the character in the book steps on stage, it's a basic subliminal psychological transaction. He steps on the page and he says, "Hi, I'm the main character." And the audience then says, "Oh, are we going to like you?" And the absolute worst answer is, "Yes, you are, and I'll tell you why." That's the worst possible answer. The best possible answer, says Mamet, and I agree with him, the best possible answer is, "Are we going to like you?" The guy says, you might not, and I really don't care." And so that is the only way to make a convincing character, but it's a leap of faith, because you are not trying to curry favor. You're not trying to make him likable. You just present him, and then you cross your fingers and hope somebody will like him. And I'm very happy that you do. Thank you.
You know, it's interesting that Kipling once wrote the famous line, there are 69 ways of constructing tribal lays, and every single one of them is right. And I think that really covers writing, too, because, listening to Lee, my own philosophy is so different. In my books, the guy steps forward and says, "Hi, I'm the main character," and 6 chapters later, I kill him. And then the reader says, "What? You can't do that. He was the main character. He was supposed to go through all the way." And then they're afraid for the rest of the book, which is what I like. But there are 69 ways of constructing tribal lays, and every single one of them is right. Do we have other questions? There's one back there. Oh, okay. Yeah, right there. Okay.
When you're in the process of writing a new book, what is your morning routine?
My morning routine?
Yes, or just your routine throughout the day.
Well, it's funny you say morning, because that is my one firm, unshakable belief that nothing of value is ever achieved in the morning. So it was really one of those things, having worked, it was, TV is a 24/7 business, and having worked a rotational roster system that would sometimes be all night, sometimes early morning, sometimes evenings, I thought, being a writer, I can work when I want, and I never ever start before about 12 or 1, and I get up at maybe 10, and I have what I call the Great British Breakfast, which is 6 cups of coffee and 5 Camels, and then take a shower, get dressed, and start around lunchtime. And so there's no morning routine whatsoever. But I work it's a serious business. You got to work. It's a job. You got to do the work. And so I work every day that's available to me until the book is finished. Of course, not every day is available because you got other things to do. And then you got, like coming up, family stuff. Presumably Thanksgiving, Christmas, they'll want to do something. So that'll delay me a little bit. But I work every available day till it's done. And
I only work, of course, in my own place at home. I'd like to be undisturbed, but I know other writers who will work on the road. Like, did you write 5 pages this morning? Or
no, that's my other problem. That if I know that I've got to finish at a certain time, then it just paralyzes the whole day. There's some kind of inhibition about, it's not really worth developing this strand or this idea because I'm going to have to stop soon, even though I might stop then anyway. Just the knowledge that I've got to stop makes it worthless. So I can't write on the day when I'm doing anything else. And so, which is fine, because then if there are days when you're doing something in the evening or an appearance or something, you can do all the businessy stuff, email and put all your receipts in ready for the tax man and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, we're exactly the same in that regard. If I have a doctor's appointment at 5 in the afternoon, I can't work at 10 in the morning.
Sure.
I do emails and businessy stuff, as you say, but I don't want to, just the looming presence of that 5 o'clock.
Exactly. It looks like a problem ahead of you.
And I certainly don't write, in distant hotels or on airplanes or on trains or any of the stuff like some of my colleagues do.
No, I don't either, because it's it's an actual joy and a pleasure to do it. I really, really find that it's bizarre. It sounds stupid, but if there's a good sentence or a good paragraph, or particularly a good pivot, because pivoting from one thing to the next thing is often the hardest thing. People say getting him from one room to the next room is the hardest part of writing. If it comes out really well, even if it's just a couple of lines, the huge satisfaction in that is, obviously it's very private to the writer because I don't expect anybody else to understand it, but it is just a wonderful feeling. So I love to be at home, just enjoying it.
Did your years in television influence your novel writing? I mean, did you ever write screenplays or teleplays? And you obviously read a great many of them. You know the format.
Yeah, I think it really didn't all that much, because there's such a huge. The key difference between movies and TV and book writing is a technical thing called point of view control. because a camera is a roving thing. A camera can go anywhere and look at anything with complete equality. Whereas in a book, you've got to have a lot tighter point of view control. Whose scene is this? Whose eyes are we looking through? And that dictates what you can see. And so there isn't actually that much commonality in terms of the writing, but there's a huge commonality in that it teaches you real quick, this is not about you. This is not about you being a cool guy, buying a black turtleneck and a black leather jacket and being a writer. You know, it is about the audience. First, second, and third, it's about the audience. And so working in TV, really, you get over yourself real quick.
You do leave, speaking of point of view, you do leave Reacher's point of view occasionally, although not often.
Yeah, I mean, some of the books are first person, entirely Reacher's point of view. Some are third person, more omniscient than others. So I do change it up in that sense. But within the book itself, there's a rigorous discipline about not breaching the point of view, because readers don't necessarily understand what's happening to them, but they feel seasick a little bit. It feels a little bit diffuse. They don't necessarily know why it's not working, but that's why it's not working, because the classic case is if you're the main character and you're on the phone, then we're entitled to know about you, but then we get comments about the person you're talking to. You know, she shrugs, or she looks away or something. We can't know that. If we're looking at you and she's 100 miles away, we can't know that. And if you put it in, that destabilizes the narrative in a way which makes the reader queasy in a subliminal way.
So we have one back there.
Thank you. The question I have is something from reading a few of your books. You have a kind of retrospective look at Reacher when he says something about when he's in a movie theater as a child and it was an experiment. And in this movie theater, there's a horror moment and all the other children sit back and Reacher goes forward. And I'm just curious where you got that from, what research you did for that, because it seems to be a way that you're describing why Reacher is willing to walk into danger so easily.
Yeah, well, that was largely, I'm sure there is a study like that, because, you know, the Department of Defense did endless studies. One of the things I love about history is what the Department of Defense and CIA and stuff did in the 1950s, which was practically everything, and it was completely insane, a lot of stuff they did, you know, just wild things. And so I'm sure there are studies like that, but I made that one up, but I wanted that happens to certain people. It happens to me. When I was a little kid, if there was a threat, I learned to step toward it rather than back off from it, because it's a lot more efficient. You're closer to the guy when you have to hit him, and so that is a fundamental difference between people. If something bad happens, some people step forward and most people step backward. And I wanted to illustrate that as happening to Reacher as a young kid. That was the first fight I ever had. I was 3 years old. My elder brother was a real geek and a nerd and little emaciated kid with big sticky out ears, and he was always bullied. And particularly by this kid from the next street called Nicky. I remember it really, really well. And I was out with my brother, and sure enough, Nicky shows up and starts taunting him. And Richard, my brother, spoke back. And I thought, great, he's going to stand up to him. There's going to be a fight. I thought, wonderful. And I was already watched this fight between Richard and Nicky. And Richard said, if you say that again, I'll smash you. And I thought, wonderful. And so, of course, Nicky said it again. So Richard, being the smart guy that he was, he said, Lee, smash Nicky.
All right. Okay. One over there.
Hi, Lee. To nerd out on process for a second, you talk about writing the story, like inventing the story as you write it, but also looking backwards at what you've written to figure out what the story is that you're trying to tell, with looking at Maine and the birds. At the end of writing, do you then revisit the whole thing to tease out the elements and the shape of the story that's emerged, or do you just trust the process of driving by looking in the rearview mirror?
Well, at the end of the process, I'm always aware of, I still have a kind of disjunction between this type of book needs a lot of pace, needs a lot of forward momentum. And so you're racing through it, you're burning through ideas. And I always still, after 23 books, fear the book is going to be too short because of that. And so I'm always aware at the end of it, I've left in a couple of maybe paragraphs, maybe 6 lines here or there, 6 lines on one page or something that are baggy. And at the time, I know they're crap, but I don't take them out because I think, shit, the book's going to be too short anyway. I can't take out another 6 lines. But of course, I get to the end of the book, it's perfectly long enough. So then I go back and take out those 2 baggy sections maybe, and then I don't do anything else. I never rewrite. I never change anything because, I'm a normal, rational person, believe me. But at the time that I'm writing, this is happening. This is what is happening. And I feel instinctively somehow that to go back and change it is dishonest. This is what happened. You can't, it's like, you look in the back of your closet and there's a shoebox full of those old photographs from the 1970s and you with your terrible hair and your terrible clothes. It's who you were, you can't alter it. And so I just leave it as this is what happened. And my editor sometimes says to me, wouldn't it be better if this happened after that? And I say, yeah, probably, but it didn't.
So your work with Granada, your work in television, you weren't doing scripts. You weren't on
No.
that, so you never had to deal with the notes from the network and the notes from the studio and the notes from the director and the notes from the star and anybody's notes.
No, I've done that subsequently. I mean, in television, I was a director, and so there was a lot of covert rewriting when stuff wasn't working, but you could never take credit for that because it would offend the actual writer. But I've done it subsequently. I had I said in 2005, the deal went to Paramount and Cruz Wagner. There was a disappointed suitor to that deal that we did not go with, who wanted to, he was just desperate for some part of me or something, and so he gave me this project. That was a great, great capsule pitch. It was a really great pitch, but the actual screenplay was unbelievably bad. It was like, has this guy ever seen a movie? It was a terrible screenplay, so he wanted me to rewrite it, which I did, and I really loved it. I loved the rewriting. I wrote a really, really good script. Of course, it never got made because so many things don't, but it was a really satisfying thing to do. But then those story conferences afterwards drove me nuts. Because, literally every cliche you've ever heard. Could he have a dog? Maybe the dog's only got 3 legs. Maybe the dog's got cancer. And there was one scene, it was basically a terrorist movie, and they were going to dump some poison in a reservoir. And so there was this scene, low camera angle, pushing through a cornfield west of Chicago. And suddenly there's a big clearing, and there's a white helicopter ready to take off and dump the poison. And I remember, we got to that scene. That white helicopter, could it be black? And I'm like, it can be whatever color you want it to be. And I sort of figured it out later, though, that they were thinking ahead to the point where we all come out of the movie theater and we're on the sidewalk lighting our cigarettes and we say, I really love that part where. They want that part to be their idea. And the only way to make it their idea is to have every idea. So it's a necessary part of the process. But then that led to other things. I then did story doctoring for this guy, where I would get calls at midnight. They'd be in Toronto shooting a movie, and the last scene's not working. So would I read the screenplay and rewrite the last scene for 6 o'clock the next morning? And I loved doing that too. I loved working at night. I loved fixing things. I had a really nice time doing that. And then he would start sending me. He had title problems with a couple of movies. He would send me the pre-release DVD. Would I look at it and suggest a title? I had a really good thing going with that, but unfortunately no more, because that guy was Harvey Weinstein.
How much do you get paid for a title?
I got, I charged him, you know, the original screenplay deal I had a polish fee
Right.
of 40 grand, and anything he wanted me to do was 40 grand.
So if you came up with a one-word title, you're getting 40 grand a word. That's pretty good rate. What do we have? Do we have something else here? We have back last row there.
Yeah, thank you. Lee, I'm continuously amazed as someone, even though we have more or less a shared language, as someone who basically, it sounds like you were in England until the mid-90s, all your books, you just nail American culture and colloquialisms. And for someone, even though we have such a shared, you know, movies and the Beatles and whatever, you just nail things as if you're a native. How do you do that?
Well, you know, I moved here in 1998, but I had been, my first visit to the U.S. was 1974, because in college I married an American woman. And she, you know, therefore visiting her relatives, most of our vacations were here. And between 1974, when I first came, and 1998, when I immigrated completely legally, I hasten to point out, part of the legal immigration process is you got to go through a whole lot of weird stuff, including when you show up at the port of entry on your date of immigration, you have to be carrying in your hand a chest x-ray, proving that you do not have tuberculosis. There's a whole lot of stuff to go through, and one of the things you go through is you have to list every previous visit to the US so that they can presumably check for police records or felonies or whatever. And so I had to dig out all my old passports, and between 74 and 98, which is 24 years, there were exactly 100 visits. So I knew, I felt I knew America pretty well, especially because American culture, you know, you do not spend a lot of time hiding it under a bushel. It is all around the world. Every single country in the world, British papers are about British news and American news. French papers are about French news and American news. You know, it's a huge globally dominant thing. And I also believe that as an outsider, I see better. You know, I see stuff that you are so familiar with you no longer see. It's all new and fresh to me. So I would actually argue it's easier to write about a country that or a culture that is not exactly your own, because you know that you can't relax for a minute. You can't take anything for granted. I feel like if I was writing about Britain, I would be kind of yo-yoing between familiarity and invention in a way that would be confusing in a sense. Whereas with the US, I have to be careful about everything. I have to be totally in the zone about everything. And I think it is actually easier. So if you intend it as a compliment, I accept it completely spuriously, because actually I think it's simpler to do.
Thank you.
All right, we should do about 3 more, and then we have to let Lee sign. We had one here in the first row. If you could bring the mic up. Right here, first row.
Thank you. I had a question about why you choose the first person in some books and why you use the first person, first, and because they're very different, obviously different storytelling techniques. So I was hoping you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most natural way of telling a story, obviously, is in the first person. I did this, I did that. That is how we all tell stories, you know, unless you're seriously weird. You're going to go home and say, I did this, I went there. You don't refer to yourself in the third person. So it's natural, it's organic, it's a very quick and personal introduction to the character. It's an instant bond with the character. But there are 2 disadvantages with the first person. One is that you can only know what the hero knows. That point of view control again. You're confined to his eyes and his brain. You know nothing that he doesn't know. And in the classic thriller form, you want to know more than that. You want the meanwhile back at the ranch. You want the A role and the B role that are going to collide at some point. So thrillers, plot-wise, are much easier in third person. And first person gets a little bit stressful for the for the author because it's so pompous. I. It feels very, very self-centered. And it feels a little more relaxed to be able to step back and refer to the character in the third person. And there are certain things that you can say in the third person. You can say, he's a good-looking guy and the women like him. You can say that perfectly easily. You can't say, hey, I'm a good-looking guy. You can't say that. And so it's strengths and weaknesses. I guess I would prefer to do first person all the time, simply because it's the most natural, but it's hard and it is very confining to the plot.
So when you write in the first person, that was your preference, but you go to the third person for story?
Yeah, the first person would be the natural preference, but third person works much better for the story, generally speaking, and a little distance from the character. I mean, Reacher cannot actually bear too much ironic distance. I have to be totally on Reacher's side. But I find it easier to talk about him as he rather than I.
Do you ever, change gears in midstream, like write one chapter and say, oh, I wrote it in first person, but I think this one would be better in third?
No, I usually start out with a sort of general sense I'm going to need the bad guy's point of view, and therefore that dictates third person from the start.
All right, 2 more questions.
I got the mic.
Okay, he's got the mic.
This is a Kodak moment, a bucket list moment for me. 2 of my favorite writers in the same room. Thank you. The other thing really is why the name Jack Reacher?
Well, it was, you remember I said that I was trying to be distinctive and not do, in the sense that I didn't want to do the soap opera thing that everybody else was doing. I wanted to carve out my own territory. Part of that was reacting against certain things. And in particular, there was a guy that had started out just a few years before me that I'd read his early books. And I knew this guy was going to be huge. And so I thought, all right, I'm not going to do what you do. And this was Michael Connolly, who early on I knew was going to be fine. And his guy is called Hieronymus. And so I thought, all right, my guy's going to have the simplest name I can find. And I figured, what are the simplest names? Jack and Joe, probably. So one was going to be Reacher and the other was going to be his brother. And the Reacher itself was, that came from my wife. It was, like I said, I wasn't deluded enough to think I'm gonna write a series of 23 books or whatever. But I hoped, I kind of hoped it would work at least for a while. So I figured, all right, the name is going to be reasonably important. With a bit of luck, people are going to start mentioning this name or thinking about this name. So the name was crucial. And I really couldn't come up with anything. I couldn't come up with a good name at all. And like I said, I was out of work. And the huge problem with being out of work is that you're at home all the time. And therefore your wife assumes that you're available for errands. And she said to me, we got to go to the supermarket. She's tiny, my wife. She claims she's 5'1" and she's actually 4'11". She said, I got to go to the supermarket to help her drag the heavy stuff home. So I said, fine. So we went into the supermarket, and every single time I've ever been in a supermarket, which by now must be well into double figures, there is always a little old lady who says to me, oh, you're a nice tall gentleman. Could you reach me that box? And so my wife said, you know what, if this writing gig doesn't work out, you could be a reacher in a supermarket.
The question of names does bring up also the question of your name is not actually LeeChild. So you started writing under a pseudonym. Why did you choose a pseudonym rather than your birth name?
Well, for habit, basically. Originally I started out, before television, I was in the theatre. Backstage, assistant stage manager in a theatre. And in Britain, the union for stage management is the same as actors. It's Actors' Equity. And British Actors' Equity had a firm rule that if your name was the same as an established member, you could not use your name. And so there was actually a character actor who had my actual name. So I was obliged to work under a different name at the beginning. And then that just became a habit. Then I went to Granada where I was under contract. I was a staff director, which meant that if I wanted to do anything that was interesting as a side project or moonlight for a friend or something like that, I had to do it under a pseudonym. That was the convention. So altogether, I was trying to tot it up the other night. It's either 6 or 7 names I've worked under. And it just seemed to me obvious that you start a new project, you have a new name. And I wanted to, my own name is Jim Grant. And that is, anecdotally, I've always found that a hard name for people to hear and repeat. They think it's Brown or Brandt, or especially on the phone or something like that. And this is such a word of mouth business that you do not want your name to be subject to confusion. So I wanted a name that was easy to understand, and child is also a noun as well as a name with warm associations for most people. And it's crucially letter C, which is, I started out in the analog era where we had shelved books in the store, and in the West we browse from left to right. We get bored and fatigued very quickly. And to be in the C section, it was absolute key. I checked this when I was starting out in 1994. I was working all this out. 63% of bestsellers were written by authors beginning with C. It's such an obvious visual thing that it like I said, it's an art, it's a joy, it's creative, it's wonderful, all those good things, but it's also a business, and you've got to take both sides of it equally seriously.
Wikipedia says it's because it was between Raymond Chandler and Agatha Christie.
Now that's made up. I mean, you very rarely find Christie and Chandler shelved in the same spot. I mean, Barnes and Noble, I'm shelved in general fiction, not mystery fiction. I don't know why, but I never thought of that. It was just I wanted to see, and I wanted something that was easy to hear and repeat.
All right, one more question. Who's got a good one here? Don't be intimidated. Okay, there's over there.
So, if the stories are falling out of you as you're writing, do you ever get to the end and find yourself surprised at what has happened?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, there's 2 kinds of surprises. One is that something just really wonderful comes along that is irresistible. You've got to go down that direction, which then leads you to a great conclusion. And then there's those sort of surprises where the shorthand is the character takes over, which is bullshit, really. I mean, who is doing the typing here? The character does not take over. What it actually means is that your head was not sufficiently in the game. You weren't totally in the zone, and your subconscious is telling you that you're screwing up. There was a minor scene in one of the books where there's a veteran in a hospital with a brain injury, and he's very touchingly described. He's got a breathing tube taped in, and he's in a vegetative state, but his wife wants him treated with dignity, so Reacher offers to shave him. So there's this scene where Reacher is shaving this guy, and then I realized, wait a minute, he's got a breathing tube taped to his face. How is that possible? And that's the sort of surprise where you're not in the zone enough. So yeah, there's those 2 sorts of surprises. And there are things that you just put in. In my very first book, I put in a thing about glasses. Somebody was wearing eyeglasses. And that was just purely a paragraph filler. It was just to fill a paragraph. And then a couple of chapters later, I realized, wow, that's a great thing. I can use that going forward. And you lay these gifts to yourself along the way. And some of them you don't use, and that doesn't matter because they're interesting in themselves, but some of them you really can exploit later to wonderful effect.
Well, thank you, Lee.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
We will send Lee out to the lobby now. If you guys could hold out till he gets set up. I asked him last night about his, signing procedures, and basically he will personalize your books, and he says photographs are okay, and you'll sign anything that they present to you within reason.
Anything except a check or a confession.
All right, so my guys will escort you out, and I'll see you out there shortly. And we'll let him get settled, and then we'll send out a few of you guys to join him. But thank you for coming, everyone. It's been great. I hope some of you will come back for some of our other events that we have here. We have quite a few good ones coming up. Some people are sneaking out already. I hope they're just leaving and not trying to jump the line. Let's start with this side, the last 3 rows here. This side, the last 3 rows. Thank you.